Welcome to Lesson 3 of Principles of Health Science. Today we'll look at the communication process and professional communication. This is the most important set of notes that you'll do for Unit 1, and it'll definitely be on your test or whatever, so very important that you understand communication. Now, there are two types of communication covered. There's just normal comms, and then there is professional communication. So normal communication is just when you are using the process of exchanging words, sounds, sights, actions to share information and express thoughts. But this, combined with verbal, written, and other forms of communication, equals professional. So professional communication is normal communication, but it includes written, verbal, visual, and digital to provide factual information. Equals facts. And this is professional. Okay, this creates the professional communication that incorporates the communication process. Okay. Now there are reasons we communicate, and there are 5 reasons that you need to understand for why communication is happening and examples for each of them. There will definitely be this on your test. So all communication has a purpose, and the first purpose that you need to understand is that people talk to inform each other. And this can be when you say, I want something. I want a burger. I want food. Okay, you're telling someone this is what you want. Are you trying to convince them that you want food? No, that is just informing. I want something. You need to do something. That's just a statement. That's informing them of something you want. Now there is persuasion. So to persuade. When you're trying to persuade someone, you're attempting to change this person's behavior. So if you say that if you eat this food, you're going to be miraculously better, okay? So this food will give you riz. It'll give you plus 1,000 aura. Will it really? Probably not. But I don't know what food that is. That is to persuade. You're saying, you're not saying I want food. You're saying if you eat this food I'm telling you, you'll get plus 1,000 aura. And now there is instruct. And then you can say, please eat the food. Are you trying to persuade them to eat the food? No, you're just making a statement, please eat the food, and you're telling them, eat the food. That is to instruct them to do something. Now, you can make a request. This is kind of in persuasion, but this is a separate thing. You need to make a request. Okay, if you make a request, you're going to say, can I have something? Can I have food? Well, some people are going to say, it's not may, but I don't care. So it says, can I have food? That you're asking a question, you're requesting food. I want food is you're informing them of something. Can I have food? There you go. You're directly asking them something that's making a request. Now, the final one is to respond to a request. This can be food will be given. I will give you food. Now, if you said food will be given without asking the question, there you go. That's an inform. But because you're responding directly to this request, that's going to be responding to a request. Now, those are the purposes of communication, and you need to know those. But let's look at the communication process. So there are many different parts to successful communication, and it's a series of actions on part of the sender and the receiver of a message, and it's basically the path that an encoded message will follow. So there are 6 elements to the communication process. So let me write process. Okay. The first part of a communication process is the sender. Now the sender is the person sharing the message. Okay, they have the message. So it's just a person, and they use interpersonal communication to sort through the information they want to convey. So right here, what's at the center, it's actually just intrapersonal. They're thinking on what they want to say. And it's just a person with a message. Okay, with a piece of information. It's not even a message yet, but they need to communicate this. Now you're going to move on and you're going to have the message. Now the message is where encoding happens. So very important that you know this. This is encoding. And it's the process of turning an idea into a message. So if you have an idea in your head, that's intrapersonal, but then you write it down. Well, there you go. That is a message. So let's say writing it or saying it. That is encoding. Or you're not speaking it yet, but it's thinking about speaking it. And then you're going to move on and have the channel. This is important that you remember this for speech too. Channel is the mode in which communication happens. Okay, it's how the message is transmitted. So it's the act of sending a message, and that is called transmission. So a channel is where transmission happens, and it's how the message is transmitted. So is it through talking or texting, right? That's the channel in which communication follows. Now, if a text doesn't work and you go and talk to the person, there you go, you changed the channel in which the message was conveyed and you transmitted it in a different way. So that is the channel. And then you're going to move on to the receiver. Now the receiver is the person getting the message. So it's the person who hears and sees the message. It's the audience, right? And communication can be interpersonal, it can be a group, it can be a public. So small group is 3 to 20, and public occurs with 20 plus. All right, so this is audience. Now your audience can be one person or it can be a ton of people. Still gonna follow the communication process. And then you have 2 more steps. And the next step is translation. Translation is when the message is decoded. So the message is encoded in message and it's decoded in translation. Very important that you understand that. And the message is not received if the receiver does not understand. And this is where miscommunication happens. Let's say miscommunication happens at the decoding stage. You can encode a amazing message, but if the receiver doesn't understand what you're saying because you wrote it in gibberish, then there you go, your message was not received and it failed to go through the communication process. And it's going to go all the way back. You have to start from the sender. So if the message fails here, then you have to go all the way back to the sender and fix it. And it's going to go through all the steps again. And then there is the final step, which is feedback. And in feedback is when the receiver responds to the sender. Providing feedback tells the sender whether the message was understood or not. This feedback could just be that they don't respond because they don't understand, right? So feedback. Now response in the sense that they do an action or they don't do an action. Now there is informal and formal communication, and informal is casual sharing of information. It doesn't have customs or rules of etiquette. Now, what is etiquette? Well, this is something you need to define. And etiquette is the act of using good manners in any situation. Now, in informal communication, you probably won't need etiquette. Are you going to say yes, sir, no, sir, thank you when you're just chatting with your friends? Probably not. So that is not going to be in informal communication. But formal communication does have this, and it's the process of sharing information in a conformed specific protocol. So If etiquette is just following good manners, protocol is the actual set of customs, okay? So it's the set of etiquette rules. It's what you're doing that is from good etiquette. Now, formal communication flows in directions. Now, there is upward flow of communication, and a good way to actually just talk about this is to draw a pyramid. Okay, and then these are the people, and this is their leader. So upwards communication could be when the people in the lower sense are going to the leader. So that is upwards. This is a nurse telling the head nurse something is wrong. Okay, and then there is lateral flow. Now, lateral flow is when the communication is happening among people of the same rule, between peers. Okay, so if it's happening between leaders, well, then that's also lateral. But it's basically nurse to nurse, okay? Or doctor to doctor, teacher to teacher, instructor to instructor. And then there is downwards flow, and this is your teacher giving you instruction. This could be a doctor telling a physician assistant what to do, okay? So this is downward. So higher level to lower level. Okay. Now, let's look at communicating effectively. Communication follows many different channels, and communication can be written or visual. It can be verbal, you're talking, or it can be nonverbal. Now, what is the difference between written and nonverbal? Well, nonverbal are your actions. So verbal communication also includes sign language, actually. But nonverbal communication are gestures, your eye contact, all of that shows how you are feeling in a situation. So gestures. And this is maybe you're emailing, right? And visual communication is using pictures. So written is emailing and requires standard English, punctuation, and all of that, recording words through writing. But there is visual communication, which is using pictures. So if you draw a picture, it can add clarity. If you use a graph, it can show data more clearly. So graphics or infographics are visual communication. And then there's verbal communication, which is just speaking words. And then nonverbal is action, behavior, attitude that sends a message to the receiver. And it has to be considered in context. And what does that mean? Well, if somebody is telling you something and they seem really, really excited, but they seem scared when you're looking at them, they're very red, or they're like, I don't know, they're showing nonverbal cues that this isn't a positive event. Well, you should get those cues, and maybe they're being sarcastic, right? Sarcasm is when verbal or written communication doesn't pertain to the nonverbal communication. You're going to be saying things very exaggerated, but your nonverbal cue, like rolling your eyes, is going to be different. And that's why context is very important. And it determines what the nonverbal message means. So context needs to be considered to get this message here. And nonverbal communication is body language, eye contact, touch, personal space, behavior, and attitude. Your body language is basically how you, let's write that actually. Nonverbal is going to be body language. And these are gestures, facial expressions, eye contact. So if you're looking at a person without staring at them, and that can be considered that you're paying attention to them in most situations. And then touch, handshake could be touch. So, and then personal space, this is called proxemics. Actually, in speech, but it's how close you are between your receiver and the sender. So how close the sender is to the receiver. So personal space. If you're closer, maybe this isn't a formal event. Maybe you're trying to get lots of engagement. So you're walking around giving people high fives. That's a good use of personal space. Proxemics. And then there's behavior, so the actions you do, and then there's attitude. So paralanguage is the attitude projected with the tone of a person's voice. So paralanguage is just things that can modify language. So paralanguage could be your tone, but it could also be your pitch or how loud you are, so volume. So they modify voice. And then there are barriers to communication. Anything that prevents clear communication, anything that prevents the receiver. So prevents communication. Let's write that. Now there are two common types of barriers, and these are important that you understand. Sender barrier. Sending barrier. This occurs when the sender does or says something that causes the receiver to stop listening. So this could be bias. If you bring on a really strong opinion about something and your receiver doesn't want to hear it, then they're not going to listen to you. And that is bias when you're bringing on that strong opinion, so it can cause inflammatory language and then your receiver won't listen. And it could also be as simple as the sender is talking too quietly. Then that's a sender barrier that stops the receiver from understanding or listening. And then there is a receiver barrier. Now, a receiver barrier is the exact opposite. It's when the sender does everything right, but the receiver doesn't care. Not always that they don't care, but it occurs when the receiver says or does something that causes the sender's message to not be received. This is if your receiver is wearing AirPods, or they're doing something that would prevent the sender's message from being delivered. If they're yelling at the sender, if they're choosing not to listen, that's a receiver barrier. That's their action. So the biggest thing about these are whose action is it? Who is doing the action? If the sender is doing something wrong, then that's a sender barrier. If the receiver is doing something wrong, then that is a receiver barrier. That is it for communication and the communication process. Bye.